Hello, welcome to another video. In this video we're going to talk about Reggie Kray, the life of Reggie Kray. We will start in 1957 for Reggie because we did go through some of Ronnie's early life in my last video, so I don't think I really want to go through Reggie's early life. It's quite similar to Ronnie's with the boxing and diphtheria. So I think we'll start at 1957. Things really picked up for Reggie in 1957 while Ron was in prison and at Longgrove. Reg acquired the R Club. It was a big house at 145 Bow Road. A young tearaway named David Cohen approached Reggie to tell him about the empty property on Bow Road and that it would make a good place for a club. Reg borrowed the first quarterly payment for the rent from a friend called Johnny Hutton. Johnny Hutton was a friend of the twins. He was a car dealer. I think he might have been under the twins' protection at the time. So things were up and running for Reg's new project. The building that was to become the R was not in good shape, and Reg got to work straight away on it. Reg had all the paperwork and the licenses to get the club up and running, and it took a promise of a partnership with older brother Charlie to secure some money to stock the bar. This is where the R was, in Bow Road. The building's not there anymore, it was knocked down a long time ago, but here's a picture of Bow Road as it was in the 50s. The club is obscured in the background there on the right, but that's where the club was on Bow Road.
Well, it was a big house, that's all the R was. I mean, it wasn't like a club at all, it was just two big rooms. And yet Reggie always loved that because it was the very first club that they'd actually owned.
The club opened in the spring of 1957 and its opening night was a success. Reggie was in his element as a host, making the guests feel welcome.
The R Club, I was kind of married to it because I was there day and night. It suited me, I wanted to be a good club host, which I was, and everything suited me. Everything ran according to plan. Everybody used to buy me gin and tonic, I buy them gin and tonic, and I was very happy. I didn't go out, I didn't used to go out a lot, I used to stay in most of the time and just enjoy myself.
Charlie stayed in the background, doing duties like manning the bar. Ron at this time was away in prison and then Longgrove, but Reg named the club R for Ron and Reg, as even though Ron was away, there was no doubt it was his club too. The doormen of the club were Tommy the Bear Welch and a very large Big Pat Connolly. What's interesting about Pat Connolly at this time is that he had no criminal record, and he would also become a loyal member of the firm. Although he was not part of the Kray trial in 1969, he was a loyal friend right from the start at the R days. Other members around this time of the R, where it was becoming the firm, were people like Limehouse Willie, Billy Donovan, Johnny Davis, Mickey Fawcett. Limehouse Willie would later give evidence at the Kray trial in 1969, despite being a long-time friend of the twins. The R is also where the Tills got involved with the twins, and also Mad Teddy Smith. The Regal Billiard Hall was the formation of what was called the firm, but the R brought in a lot more new faces. Some of these faces would drift away as things got madder with the twins from the mid-60s onwards. Others would stay until the bitter end, and many would ultimately give evidence against the twins that would see them sentenced to 30 years recommended. Things were good for Reg at this time. He had a few successful clubs ranging from the Billiard Hall to the R to a few smaller ones like Anwar's and the Wellington Way Club. This is where the Wellington Way Club was. It's not there anymore, but it was at number 8. The building's long gone now. It was more of what they would call a spieler rather than a proper club like the R. Later in June 1960, the Wellington Way Club would be raided by the police, mopping up a few of the firm. In February 1959, a Regal Billiard Hall regular, Daniel Shea, asked Reggie to accompany him to a shop at 267 Finchley Road to help recover a supposed gambling debt. The shop was a leather goods shop. The shop owner was named Murray Podro. Georgie Osborne, a friend of the twins, also accompanied Reggie and Shea to the shop. Whilst Daniel Shea was talking to Podro, an argument broke out. Reggie moved in and he headbutted Murray Podro, giving him a black eye. According to Reg, he had given Murray Podro a card for the double R before the trouble had started, so that later led the police straight to Reggie's door. Reggie, Shea and Osborne were arrested for demanding money with menaces. The real truth of the matter was that Murray Podro was being extorted for money by Daniel Shea. It is said that the gambling debt is not entirely true. That was the reason Daniel Shea said to Reggie about going to the shop. I think the three men went there for extortion purposes, but I'm not sure how aware Reggie was of this at the time. It's possible he knew what was happening, but it's also possible that he went into it blind, with Shea not being truthful about it being a gambling debt. It was extortion, and the three men were charged with demanding money with menaces. On the 10th of April 1959, Reggie was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The case received a fair amount of press, and they were accused of using Chicago-type protection methods. Reggie was later granted bail on the 22nd of September 1959. Reggie was quite a violent man. Lots of Ron's violence is documented, but Reggie was also a very hard, violent man. He may have came across as charming in the double R, but he could turn and be very violent. Reggie's violence was different to Ron's. Reggie's was more controlled and with reason. Ronnie was more erratic with his violence and less controlled.
Reggie was more businesslike, a bit more sensible, violent. Don't worry about that. He was a violent, vicious man, but it was more directed. There was more reason behind his violence. Where Ronnie done it for fun.
An example of Reggie's violence was at the Green Dragon Club in February 1960. Reggie had been drinking there. It was a small spieler in a place called Green Dragon Yard off Whitechapel High Street. He was drinking with a few people, including Sonny the Yank and Bill Ackerman. I think they might have been the joint owners. The twins were getting some money out of the club. The club was on the protection list, I believe. They were all having a pleasant enough drink when Reggie got up to leave. Sonny the Yank called Reg son in what Reg seemed an insulting manner. Reggie punched and headbutted him, breaking his jaw. This is just an example of Reggie's violence at the time. While you didn't have to tiptoe around him like you did with Ronnie, you still had to be on your guard with Reggie in things you said. It was around the Double R Club days that Reggie met Frances Shea. It was probably around 1958 or so. She lived at 57 Ormsby Street in Hoxton. Reg met her when she was very young, possibly 15 or so. She was still at school. Her brother Frankie Shea was a driver for Reg at the time, and Reg called at the house in Ormsby Street to see him when he was confronted at the door by Frances. I think Reg fell in love with her straight away, and he eventually asked her out. Frances had a few issues with mental health, mainly depression, but she would slip deeper into this in future years. By 1960, Reg was well and truly caught in Frances, and like I said, bar the Murray Podro incident, things were going quite well for him. That is until the 26th of July 1960, when his appeal for demanding money with menaces was rejected. He was recalled to prison, and he turned himself into authorities to finish his sentence at Wandsworth Prison. At Wandsworth, just like Ron did previously, Reg bumped into Frank Mitchell. Frank was not known as the Mad Axeman yet. Also, another person that Reg got friendly with in Wandsworth at this time was a man called Jack McVitie. Jack would later join up with the firm for odd jobs. Reggie came out of prison on the 25th of February 1961. By the time Reg had come out, the Double R had gone. That was finished by the end of 1960. Also gone was Anwar's and the Wellet and Way Club. I'm not sure if the Double R was on life support before Reg went away, or if Ronnie had run it into the ground. It's no secret that Ronnie liked giving away free stuff from the clubs, drink, money. So I think that's why a lot of their clubs went under. It was mainly Ronnie's bad business sense, and where Reg wasn't around towards the end of the Double R, I should imagine Ron just ran it into the ground. Esmeralda's barn was up and running by this time though, and soon after that they had the Kentucky Club. They also had the Cambridge Rooms out in Kingston Bypass. I'm sure that started around this time in the very early 1960s. Not long after coming out of prison, Reg was arrested for burglary. Apparently he was seen leaving a flat with £502 worth of jewellery. This sounds like Reggie was being framed here. Whether it's by the police, I don't know. At the time, Ronnie was also accused of trying car door handles. I don't believe this. There was no reason the twins would suddenly turn to petty crime when they had clubs and protection money coming in and some frauds. It don't make any sense at all. They were obviously by this time a bit of a name as far as the police were concerned, so maybe they was trying to get them fitted up on anything they could find. These were the boom years for the twins. These are the years where they were making some good money. This is when Leslie Payne was about to offer his services in setting up some long-term frauds and taking over clubs like Esmeralda's Barn. I don't think it would ever get this good with money for the twins, not until they started making a few quid in prison anyway. This really was the boom years for the twins. Reggie, along with Ronnie, was involved in the Hideaway Club saga, which I mentioned in the Ronnie video, but they were both later acquitted of this. Reggie at this time was talking about getting married to Frances at this stage, and although the relationship was rocky at times, they were still hanging in there. Reg mentions about getting married in the interview he'd done at the time with Ronnie that was on the news programme.
What are you going to do now that it's all over?
I like to have a bit of family life now, you know. I intend to get married in the near future. I did before this case, but it's put back over the case, and let's get married as soon as possible, you know.
Just doing this video now, it's surprising how quiet Reggie's life was in comparison to Ron's. He was busy being a club host and getting into other bits and pieces, but compared to Ronnie, he seems to have had a quieter time of it. Ron had the Boothby thing, Lenny Hamilton branding, the Britannia assault and being certified insane. Reg didn't really have too much going on. He did get sent to prison for the demanding money with menaces, but there's nothing really of note to say about Reggie other than that in the early to mid 1960s. As for Frances, she had a quiet personality. Maureen Flanagan, Violet Kray's hairdresser, once said of Frances, "For all her beauty, she seemed quite timid. We chatted briefly, but you could tell she was a nervous thing. At one point she got up to make us all tea, while I got on with Violet's hair. She was clattering around nervously, picking things up and putting them down, frowning a little bit. She didn't seem to be in any way domesticated. Just making the tea for 3 people seemed too much for her." It probably can't be stressed enough how difficult things would have been for Frances. By all accounts, Ronnie really hated her and was always having a dig.
The hostility was there, continuous, because Ronnie used to really go to town with her.
Frances and Reggie lived below Ron for a while at Cedar Court, and it was said that often Reg would be up at Ronnie's flat till all hours of the morning, with Frances left downstairs, probably hearing whatever was going on up in Ronnie's flat. And there was a lot of activities in Ronnie's flat at Cedar Court. We know that. That is probably where the hate for her came from. Plus it's often noted that Ron just wasn't keen on women at all, bar his mother and one girl called Monica that he said he loved. Ronnie didn't really like women. Although Reg loved her, these times must have been very hard for Frances, with Reg out all hours of the night, or Frances having to sit in clubs all night. I think it was said that she didn't really want to be sitting in clubs all night, every night.
Frances wanted a different life, and she didn't want to be out all night long in clubs and things like that. You know, she didn't want that.
But nevertheless, Reg and Frances did marry in 1965 in what was dubbed the East End Wedding of the Year. There's no doubt it was a happy day with smiles all around, even from Ronnie. David Bailey was brought in to take photographs of the day. Frances's mum, Elsie Shea, she wore black, showing her disapproval of the wedding. Her attire was more suited to a funeral. It was no secret that Frances's parents didn't like Reggie. I think he was even banned from the house at some stages. And especially in rocky moments with Frances, he would have to sit outside and speak to Frances through an open window. These are just things that are said. How true they are, who knows, but the relationship would have been rocky. The mixture of Reggie's life as a gangster, Ronnie being as dominant as he was, and Francis's mental health, it was a recipe for disaster. And in June 1967 it all came to a head when Francis committed suicide. She was only 23 and it was just over 2 years since her wedding day. At the time she was living with her brother at his flat in Wimborne Court in the borough of Hackney. Although she and Reg were living apart, I think things were starting to be on the mend at this point between Francis and Reggie. But Francis was found by her brother on the afternoon of the 7th of June. A couple of days before, on the 5th of June, she had been to see her doctor, Dr. Julia Silverstone. She had told the doctor she was feeling much better and was due to go on holiday with her husband. She asked for some pills to help her with the flight. I think Reg had booked a holiday to Ibiza, so they were due to go to Ibiza. Reg did call at her flat the day of her death but got no answer at the door. He later said he sensed something was wrong and was going to climb through a window. Reg turned his anger towards the parents of Francis, blaming them for her death. They in turn probably blamed the Reg. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. There's no doubt that she had strong feelings for Reg, but the life he led was really not a good thing for somebody like Francis's nature. Maybe the glitz and glamour was good at first with the clubs and the respect that came with it, but I can see that fading away once it just becomes a nightly routine, and if not that, then she is just stuck indoors while Reggie was out with Ron or upstairs in Ron's flat when they was at Cedric Court. It just seems a complete mess looking in from the outside. You have to add to this that Ronnie was bad to her, and by all accounts he berated her openly in front of people. It must have just got too much for her. You have to think also that she could never really have another life with another man after Reggie. Like Albert Donahue said in an interview, he would have his legs cut off if Reggie found out.
The problem was, an ordinary person would have gone through a divorce and met someone else. Now she couldn't do that. If you can imagine some handsome young chap falling for Reggie Kray, and Reggie heard about it, he's going to have his legs cut off. So she could never have another life, sort of thing.
At the inquest of Francis's death on the 13th of June 1967, that was attended by Reggie and his brother Charlie, the verdict was of suicide while of unsound mind. The death was from barbiturate poisoning. It was also mentioned that Francis had suffered from a personality disorder, and she had suffered from depression from the age of 13. She even attempted suicide then at the age of 13. Francis did leave a suicide note, and it reads, "Dear Mum, Dad and Frankie, I'm sorry I've had to do this way, but do me a favour and don't grieve too much over me. After all, it's useless now, and you have the baby to compensate for me. I was dying in any case. You know when it comes, there's nothing any doctor can do for you then. I wish it wasn't me that had to bring disaster on the family. If I'd had the guts, I would have drowned myself. It all happened since I had that relapse, and I've had to keep on as long as possible for your sake. I'm sorry I've told Bubbles some of the unusual things that have happened to me. Please don't grieve for me. It's been a hard enough job for me to keep alive these last 7 weeks. That's why I've always been so fidgety. Please forgive me as my last wish. I couldn't go on any longer, and you know I am not the person to give in if there's any chance of survival, which there wasn't. Please love me always. Think there's always Francis to compensate. Please forgive me. Love and kisses, Francis." I will say it again, like I did in the Ronnie Kray video that I done. Mental health issues back then were not like today, and the mental health services open to Francis would have been slim. It was probably all dealt with by her GP. Failing that, you would see a psychiatrist, and then after that it's an asylum. We're lucky today that it's more recognised and there's more help. Poor Francis and her mental health, like Ronnie, she would have been virtually unmonitored when compared to today's standards. I'm not saying she didn't see anyone at all about it, but I don't think the right help would have been there for her in 1967. There was probably the odd psychiatrist visit, but in them days it was more pull yourself together type of thing. At this point, Reggie seems to have given up on life despite their troubles. Reg did love Frances, and his whole world fell apart from this point. The only place Reg could fall back into was the arms of his twin brother Ronnie, but that was the last thing that Reggie needed. Ron by this stage would not have been any comfort to Reg. It sounds bad to say it, but Ron was maybe glad Frances was dead. I think Ron saw her as a barrier between him and Reg. People around them at the time make no secret of the fact that Ron really did dislike Frances. I think he tolerated her because Reg loved her and he loved Reg, so would obviously want to see Reg happy, but for Ron it was probably like he didn't have to battle for Reg anymore. When she died, he probably felt he had got his Reg back. I'm not saying this is necessarily true, and it does sound bad saying it, but it's just thoughts in my mind. You will have different opinions on it. Like I said in past videos, I do see Ron as having a jealous nature sometimes, and the thought of him losing Reg to Frances, I think, would have been a very big deal. And let's be honest, there was a chance that Reg could have escaped Ron and had children, and there was a clear path for Reg to get away from that life, but it just didn't work out. Reg was drinking more heavily. It's said that he was on 5 milligrams of Valium 3 times a day. Valium with drinking is not good at all. It's a very powerful anti-anxiety drug, and you don't drink on that stuff really. Next up for Reg was the murder of Jack McVitie, but I've done a video on the murder of Jack McVitie, so I won't go through all of it again. You can go back and watch that if you want to. I will state the reasons why Reg might have wanted to kill Jack McVitie, and the main reason was that there was no reason. It was a totally senseless killing that didn't need to happen, but Reg was joining in with the madness of Ron at this stage. This time between now and the twins' arrest, they were at their maddest. Gorm was the more sensible Reg, and in its place was somebody just as volatile as Ronnie. The death of Frances had destroyed Reggie. There was an incident where Reggie shot Nobby Clark. It was something Nobby Clark had said about Frances a while before he got shot. Reg saved it up in his mind, and one drunken night went to Nobby's flat in the early hours of the morning and shot him. I think this incident is sometimes given as a person being shot who's called Frederick in some books, mostly in John Pearson's books, but I'm not sure if this is the same incident, but it's almost identical, so I assume that they do mean Nobby Clark, but for some reason they're calling him Frederick. Reg was arrested with his twin brother Ron at his mother's flat at Braithwaite House in Bun Hill Road, Shoreditch on the 8th of May 1968. His parents were away at the time at the twins' country house, the Brooks, in Suffolk. There's not much said about Reg at his trial in 1969. Ron took the stand, but Reg never. It's said that Reg called the prosecutor a fat slob when Frances was mentioned, but there is conflicting accounts on this. It's also said that Ronnie said this, but I do believe that it was Reggie that said this, and it was said from the dock. Another thing Reg supposedly famously said at the trial, or it could have been the committal proceedings, I'm not too sure. It was when a briefcase was produced that had a cyanide syringe in it. The suitcase was going to be used to kill a man at the Old Bailey. A man called Paul Alvley was going to commit the crime. It was on the orders of the twins. I think it might even have been Leslie Payne who they was going to kill with it. But after the suitcase was produced, Reg said from the dock, "Are we going to hear from James Bond next?" It was all words to that effect. Reg was sentenced to 30 years recommended in prison on Wednesday the 5th of March 1969. Like Ron, Reg also had another trial after about the escape and murder of Frank Mitchell, but he was acquitted along with Ron, Charlie Kray and Freddie Foreman. Reg spent over 30 years in prison. I think it was actually about 33 years in total, so that's way over his recommendation. He did marry in prison. He married Roberta Jones in 1997. Reg was released on compassionate grounds on the 26th of August 2000. He was suffering from bladder cancer. He had complained about stomach problems in prison quite a while before that, but he wasn't given the right treatment. Reg died on the 1st of October 2000. He spent his final weeks of his life with his wife Roberta. He was in hospital and then he was moved to the Townhouse Hotel in Norwich, and that was where he died. Things could have been different for Reggie. I think given a chance again he would have done things differently, unlike his twin brother Ron. When I say done things differently, I don't mean not being a villain. Reg, like Ron, had started along the path very young, so being a villain was inevitable. I mainly mean the killing of Jack McVitie that ultimately ended everything for Reg. Unfortunately for Reg, any chance of a normal life had died with Francis in June 1967. Reg was dominated by Ron. Reg seemed to give up on life by all accounts and didn't really care what happened, drinking heavily and taking Valium. Reg joined in with Ron's madness. Without Jack McVitie being killed, things could have been very different for Reg, and we probably wouldn't be sat here talking about him today. I'm not sure Reggie would have killed if it wasn't for Ron. Some people say he killed before then, but I have to go on what's known, and as far as we know for sure, Reggie murdered one person. In his deathbed interview he does say there was one more killing, but we don't know if this is another killing by Reg, or if it was by Ron, or by both of them. Reg could have been talking about Frank Mitchell.
Were there any other killings?
One.
In my opinion, Reg should have been let out in 1995 when Ron died, or at the very least started to be integrated back into society. Like I said in my last video, I don't think Ron would have been released if he had lived longer. Like Ron, Reg will always be remembered after we are all gone. It's hard to sum up Reggie's personality. Ron's personality is more documented. It's said by associate Mickey Fawcett that Reg displayed no sense of humour whatsoever, and he was not as generous as Ronnie, but we don't really know what Reggie's personality was like. Like I say, Ron's was more documented. Despite coming across as more placid and sensible, Reggie, like Ron, was an extremely violent man, and when he wanted to be, and especially after Francis had died, Reg was just as volatile and erratic with his violence as Ronnie. I do feel sorry for Reggie. He seems to have got swept along in Ron's madness most of his life, and then eventually joining in Ron's madness near the end of their freedom. So I do feel sorry for him a little bit. I won't really talk about Reggie's sexuality. I don't think there's really any need to. I don't know what else I can say about Reggie really. I've covered some things of his life. I did miss out the early life, but I did cover Ron's early life in the last video, so I didn't think I wanted to repeat Reggie's, because Reggie's upbringing was very similar to Ron's, like I said at the start of the video, with diphtheria and the boxing, and then at the army and things like that. Things unique to Reggie really started in 1957 when he started at the Double R Club with Charlie. Reg, he lived a colourful life, but unfortunately half of that was in prison. Like always, these are just my thoughts and opinions. I didn't know Reggie personally. I've just read books and watched documentaries, so these are just the opinions that I've formed from doing that. Yours opinions might be different. You're welcome to put them in the comments. It's always nice reading what you have to say. It's interesting. I'd like to thank you all for watching the video, and I will see you again in the next one. Thank you.